In a voice so calm it sliced through the suffocating pretension of the Bank of America Premium Lounge, the little black girl simply stated, "I just want to see my balance." Charles Whitman III, perched behind his gold-plated laptop, paused his furious typing, his manicured fingers hovering over the keys. He peered over the rim of his designer glasses, as though she just delivered the punchline to the world's most ludicrous joke. There she stood, barely reaching the VIP counter, a transparent folder clutched in her small hands. Dozens of Millionaire clients, draped in the latest fashions, watched her with a grotesque blend of disbelief and thinly veiled amusement. Her worn sneakers and plain t-shirt were a stark rebellion against the $3,000 suits and designer handbags that populated the air-conditioned space. "Did you hear that, darling?" Charles drawled, loud enough for the entire lounge to overhear, a condescending smirk plastered across his face. "The child wants to see the balance. She's probably mistaken this place for a regular bank." A wave of suppressed laughter rippled through the room, an orchestrated soundtrack to the girl's public humiliation. Lana Jackson had spent her young life being subtly, and not so subtly, reminded that she didn't belong in places like this, that children like her should know their place. But in that moment, something flickered in her dark eyes, a resolve that belied her tender age. It was as if she carried a burden, a secret far too weighty for her 9 years. Mr. Patterson, the branch manager, approached her with a practiced smile, the kind that never quite reached his eyes. "Sweetie," he said, his voice dripping with patronizing sweetness. "This is the premium section. Children must be accompanied by an adult." He gestured vaguely towards the impeccably dressed clientele. "Perhaps you're lost? The regular branch is just across the street." "I'm not lost," Lana replied, her voice steady. With a delicate precision that contrasted sharply with the surrounding rudeness, she placed the transparent folder on the polished marble counter. "My grandmother told me to come here at this time to this counter." There was no wavering in her voice, no hint of tears, only a disturbing serenity that seemed entirely inappropriate for a child facing such open contempt. Charles, unable to resist the opportunity to further assert his dominance, snapped his laptop shut. He advanced towards her like a predator sensing vulnerable prey. "Your grandmother, huh? And what's her name, sweetheart? Perhaps she's our cleaning lady." His comment sparked another round of stifled laughter amongst the gathered elites. "Or maybe she works in the kitchen of the hospital where my wife gets her plastic surgeries." Madison, dripping in diamonds and faux concern, covered her mouth with a gloved hand, feigning horror while her eyes gleamed with malice. "Charles, be kind. The girl clearly doesn't understand where she is." But Lana didn't flinch. Instead, an almost imperceptible change rippled through her posture. Her shoulders straightened, her chin lifted slightly, and for the first time, a flicker of a smile touched her lips. It was the kind of smile that seasoned observers would instantly recognize as dangerous. "Dorothy Jackson," she said clearly, each word ringing with the weight of a stone dropped into still water. "That's my grandmother's name, and she told me that some people here know that name very well." The effect was instantaneous. Mr. Patterson blinked rapidly, as if trying to process an impossibility. His hand hovered hesitantly over the computer keyboard. Charles, clearly not recognizing the name but sensing the sudden shift in the atmosphere, raised a questioning eyebrow. "Patterson," Charles snapped impatiently. "Type in that ridiculous name and let's get this joke over with. I have a meeting with investors in 20 minutes. But as everyone waited, consumed by their cruel amusement, no one noticed the subtle intelligence in the girl's eyes. She was cataloging every face, every reaction, as if committing them to memory. Her gaze held a patience that seemed utterly foreign to a 9-year-old. It was at that precise moment that Mr. Patterson typed the name into the system. And then, something extraordinary happened. His expression shifted dramatically. He blinked again, retyped the name, and the color drained from his face, leaving him ashen. It was as if he had stumbled upon a ghost lurking in the database. There, before all the sneering eyes, Lana remained motionless, a silent guardian of a secret too potent to be revealed prematurely. And if this tale of prejudice and unexpected turns has piqued your interest, remember to subscribe to this channel, because what is about to unfold within those bank walls will serve as a potent reminder that underestimating someone can be the most colossal mistake of your life. Mr. Patterson, desperately trying to mask his shock, slammed the computer screen shut, his fingers trembling as he fumbled with random commands, desperately buying time to process the information he had just unearthed. Charles, growing increasingly impatient with the delay, drummed his fingers on the marble counter, his irritation escalating. "What's the problem, Patterson? A simple query shouldn't take this long," he said, his voice laced with the arrogance of someone accustomed to instant obedience. "Unless you're making excuses for this awkward situation." Madison let out a sharp, brittle laugh, adjusting her pearl necklace as she surveyed Lana with the detached curiosity of someone observing an exotic animal in a zoo. "Darling, perhaps you should call your grandmother. She's probably worried sick, not knowing where you've wandered off to. Children have a tendency to get lost in places that aren't meant for them." Her voice dripped with false maternal concern. Lana remained unmoved, but something in her eyes shifted, as if a long-dormant memory had been awakened. She vividly recalled her grandmother Dorothy's words, spoken just 3 days before her passing. "Daughter," Dorothy had rasped, her voice weak but firm, "when you go to the bank, you will meet people who will try to make you feel small. Let them talk. Let them laugh. Because he who laughs last laughs best." "My grandmother is no longer here," Lana stated simply, her voice maintaining its unsettling calm. "She died last week, but she taught me that some people need to learn certain lessons the hard way." The comment triggered a brief, uncomfortable silence. Charles cleared his throat, visibly flustered at having mocked a grieving orphan, but his inherent arrogance quickly overshadowed any fleeting sense of empathy. "Well, I'm sorry for your loss, he offered, his tone devoid of genuine sincerity. But that doesn't change the fact that you shouldn't be here. This place is for people who truly understand serious finance. Not for... He trailed off, gesturing dismissively towards her childish attire. It was at that moment that something truly intriguing occurred. With deliberate movements, Lana opened her transparent folder and retrieved a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. In the center, in elegant, flowing handwriting, was written, "To be opened only in the presence of the senior manager of Bank of America Premium located on 5th Avenue." Mr. Patterson visibly gulped as he took in the envelope. There was something about the meticulous penmanship, the antique paper, that sent a shiver down his spine. Dorothy Jackson was a legend within the city's black community, a woman who had quietly built an empire while everyone underestimated her, just as they were doing to her granddaughter right now. "What's this?" Charles demanded, reaching for the envelope. Lana swiftly pulled it back, her reflexes surprisingly quick for a child. "It's not for you," she retorted, her voice laced with a firmness that made Charles recoil as if he had been physically struck. "It's for the person who truly runs this bank, not the one who just pretends to." The sheer audacity of her response sent Charles's face flushing crimson with rage. He was unaccustomed to being challenged by anyone, least of all by a 9-year-old black child. Madison grabbed her husband's arm, sensing that he was on the verge of a public eruption. "Listen here, you little..." Charles began, but he was abruptly cut off by the arrival of a figure who completely altered the dynamic of the situation. Ms. Victoria Thompson, the regional director, an elegant black woman in her 50s, approached the group with unwavering strides. Her impeccably tailored suit and commanding presence caused even Charles to instinctively straighten his posture. "Mr. Patterson," she stated, her voice slicing through the tension like a honed blade, "I received an automatic notification from the system regarding a special account inquiry. I trust that all protocols are being followed correctly." The relief on Patterson's face was palpable. Finally, someone with genuine authority had arrived to handle this impossible situation. But what he didn't anticipate was Lana's reaction upon seeing the director. A radiant smile illuminated the girl's face, the first genuine smile since she had entered the bank. "Vicky," she said, using a familiar nickname that made the director halt in her tracks. Victoria Thompson studied the child intently, and slowly, recognition dawned in her eyes. "Lana Jackson," she whispered, her voice tinged with awe. "My God, you look just like Dorothy when she was a child." Charles and Madison exchanged bewildered glances. How on earth did this child know the regional director on a first-name basis? And why did Victoria appear to be treating her with a level of respect they had never witnessed before? "Your grandmother told me you were coming," Victoria continued, her voice thick with emotion. "She said that when the time came, I would know exactly what to do." Lana extended the yellowed envelope towards Victoria, who accepted it with slightly trembling hands. "She said you would understand what is written here better than anyone else." As Victoria carefully unfolded the envelope, Charles attempted to regain control of the unraveling situation. "Victoria, surely you're not going to indulge this. This child must be confused, fabricating stories." Victoria raised a hand, silencing him instantly, something few people in Charles's life had ever managed to accomplish. She swiftly scanned the contents of the letter, her expression shifting with each line from curiosity to utter astonishment. "Patterson," she said, her gaze still fixed on the paper, "I want you to prepare the executive meeting room immediately and contact the legal department." "The executive room, now?" Patterson stammered, utterly bewildered. Victoria finally looked up, her eyes sweeping across each face before settling on Charles and Madison with an intensity that made them instinctively recoil. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced with icy formality, "I strongly suggest you reconsider any further comments. You have just committed the most egregious error in judgment of your lives." Charles attempted a dismissive laugh, but the sound emerged forced and strained. "Victoria, with all due respect, you're being a tad dramatic. It's just a child with some outlandish fantasies." It was then that Lana spoke again, her voice soft but resonating with a weight that seemed to thicken the air in the room. "Mr. Charles, have you ever heard of Jackson Holdings? The commercial property network that controls half of the commercial buildings in the city?" Charles blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. Of course, he knew Jackson Holdings. It was one of the most powerful and enigmatic corporations in the region. No one knew for certain who was behind it, but its investments moved millions. "And what does a company like that have to do with you?" he asked dismissively, but a tremor of uncertainty now underscored his tone. Lana smiled again, and this time there was something almost predatory about that smile, an expression that seemed utterly incongruous on the face of a 9-year-old. "Everything," she replied simply, "because, Mr. Charles, the cleaning lady you've been mocking and insulting for the last 15 minutes wasn't just my grandmother. Dorothy Jackson was the founder and sole owner of everything the Jackson name represents in the city." The ensuing silence was so profound that the hum of the air conditioner seemed deafening. Charles felt the blood drain from his face, leaving him pale and clammy. Madison's designer handbag slipped from her grasp and landed on the floor with a muffled thud. Patterson seemed to be struggling to draw breath. Every act of condescension, every cruel chuckle, every prejudiced remark from the past few minutes began to coalesce in their minds, forming irrefutable evidence of their own monumental stupidity. But anyone observing Lana closely would notice that she displayed no surprise at their reactions. It was as if she were meticulously following a carefully rehearsed script, each movement calculated to maximize the impact of what was to come. Victoria Thompson gently guided Lana towards the executive meeting room, leaving behind a Charles who was utterly speechless and a Madison who was frantically whispering into her cell phone, desperately trying to glean any information about Jackson Holdings. Patterson trailed behind them like a disembodied spirit, still grappling with the realization that he had almost ejected the heir to one of the city's largest real estate empires. "Lana, dear," Victoria said softly, closing the armored glass door behind them. Your grandmother prepared me for this moment for months. She knew that when you came here it wouldn't just be to check your balance. Her voice carried a mixture of affection and profound admiration. Dorothy always said you possessed something special, an intelligence that few would recognize. The girl settled into the oversized leather chair, which seemed to swallow her petite frame. Her eyes, however, remained sharp and calculating, betraying an intellect far beyond her years. Grandma taught me that sometimes people need to be confronted with the truth in a way they'll never forget, she said, retrieving a small digital recorder from her briefcase. And she told me you would help me with the legal aspects of all this. Outside the room, Charles paced back and forth like a restless animal trapped in a cage. His business-oriented mind frantically tried to assess the potential ramifications of publicly insulting the heir to one of the region's most influential corporations. Madison, you don't understand, he muttered to his wife, his voice bordering on panic. If Jackson Holdings decides to sue us or sever our contracts. Calm down, darling, Madison said, attempting to reassure him, though her own anxiety was palpable. She's just a child. Surely they'll understand that it was all a misunderstanding. Charles stopped abruptly, his eyes widening with a sudden, horrifying realization. Misunderstanding? I called her grandmother a cleaning lady. I publicly mocked a black child. He ran his hands through his perfectly styled hair, dislodging it in his distress. My God, if this leaks to the media. Meanwhile, inside the executive meeting room, Victoria opened a confidential file on her computer. Your grandmother left very specific instructions on how to proceed when this day arrived, she explained to Lana. She meticulously documented every instance of discrimination she either witnessed or experienced at this bank over the decades. Every racist comment, every instance of preferential treatment denied, every humiliation disguised as standard procedure. Lana nodded gravely, as if she were already intimately familiar with all the details. She showed me some of the recordings she made, she said simply, and she taught me how to use my cell phone to record discreetly, without anyone noticing, like I did today with everything that happened outside. Victoria smiled, her expression a blend of pride and amazement. Dorothy raised you well. But there's more, she continued, opening a physical folder. Your grandmother wasn't just the owner of Jackson Holdings. She was also a silent minority shareholder in several other companies, including. Victoria paused dramatically, allowing the weight of her words to sink in. Whitman Enterprises. A spark of understanding ignited in Lana's eyes, the first genuine sign of emotion since she had entered the bank. So, Mr. Charles has been indirectly working for my family for years without even knowing it, she stated, a hint of satisfaction coloring her tone. Precisely, Victoria confirmed. And with the changes to the will that we filed last week, you now possess enough voting power to influence significant decisions within his company. Outside, Charles had managed to regain a semblance of composure and decided that the best course of action was to employ charm and diplomacy. I'm going in there to apologize, he announced to Madison, straightening his tie. I'll explain that it was all a misunderstanding. Maybe offer a generous donation to a charity, he added, attempting to project an air of sincerity. Kids are easily impressed. A few kind words and perhaps an expensive gift will fix everything. But when Charles knocked on the conference room door and entered with his most carefully rehearsed smile, he was met with a scene he hadn't anticipated. Lana was seated at the head of the table, exuding an air of quiet authority, with Victoria positioned at her side and a stack of legal documents spread out between them. She didn't resemble a distressed child in need of comfort. She looked like a CEO presiding over a crucial business meeting. Mr. Charles, Lana said with an icy politeness that seemed utterly incongruous coming from a 9-year-old. I'm glad you decided to join us. Ms. Victoria was just explaining to me my position as a shareholder in your company. Charles felt the floor crumble beneath his feet. Shareholder? He repeated, his voice cracking with disbelief. 5% of the common stock, Victoria confirmed, consulting the documents. Enough to request audits, question management decisions, and, under certain circumstances, influence significant changes in the company's leadership. The blood drained completely from Charles's face, leaving him pale and visibly shaken. 5% may not seem like a significant amount, but he knew that in companies with a dispersed shareholding structure, a well-positioned minority shareholder could wreak considerable havoc. Listen, I'd like to sincerely apologize for the earlier misunderstanding, he stammered, desperately attempting to salvage the situation. Misunderstanding, Lana interjected, her voice maintaining its unsettling calm. Mr. Charles, you referred to my deceased grandmother as a cleaning lady, implied that I was lost, and openly mocked my presence here. She paused, allowing her words to hang in the air. That was not a misunderstanding. It was racism. Charles opened and closed his mouth several times, resembling a fish gasping for air. All his years of experience in corporate boardrooms, all his honed negotiating skills, simply evaporated in the face of the accusatory serenity of a 9-year-old who clearly would not accept empty apologies. And the most interesting thing, Lana continued, toying with the digital recorder on the table, is that everything was recorded, every word, every laugh, every comment. Her eyes met his with an intensity that caused him to involuntarily flinch. Grandma always said that people reveal their true selves when they believe there will be no consequences. Victoria leaned forward, her gaze fixed intently on Charles. Mr. Whitman, would you be interested in hearing some of your statements from earlier today? I'm certain they would be of great interest to your company's board, your investors, and perhaps some media outlets specializing in corporate conduct. It was at that precise moment that Charles realized he wasn't dealing with a traumatized child who could be easily placated with a few hollow apologies. He was facing someone who had been meticulously trained, expertly prepared, and strategically equipped for this very encounter. Every move Lana had made since the moment she entered the bank had been precisely calculated to expose the kind of person he truly was. And, worst of all, he had played directly into her hands, providing all the evidence necessary for his own downfall. The door to the room opened once again, and this time a man in an impeccably tailored suit, carrying a worn leather briefcase, entered. "I apologize for the delay," he said, addressing Lana directly. "I'm Marcus Henderson, the Jackson family's attorney. I arrived as quickly as I could after receiving the call from Mrs. Victoria." Charles watched in horror as the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. There was nothing spontaneous about this meeting. Lana hadn't simply wandered into the bank for an innocent consultation. She had orchestrated the entire situation with military precision, leveraging her own appearance as a vulnerable child as a weapon to expose the prejudice she knew she would encounter. And now, seated in that room surrounded by lawyers, bank executives, and a 9-year-old girl who clearly possessed more power than he had ever imagined, Charles finally grasped the full magnitude of the mistake he had made. But what he didn't yet realize was that all this drama had merely been the opening act of something far grander. Something that Lana and her late grandmother had meticulously planned for years. A lesson he would never forget about the perils of underestimating those whom society often teaches us to disregard. Marcus Henderson opened his leather briefcase and extracted a stack of printed documents, methodically arranging them on the conference table. Charles watched each movement with mounting dread, as if he were witnessing his own execution being prepared before his very eyes. "Mr. Whitman," Marcus began with the clinical precision of someone who had been preparing for this moment for months. "Would you care to review some of your public statements from earlier today? I have the complete transcript here, courtesy of the digital recording Ms. Lana made." He held up the small device that the girl had strategically left visible throughout the conversation. That's illegal," Charles stammered, his carefully constructed business facade finally crumbling. "You can't record private conversations without consent." Victoria smiled coldly, a predatory glint in her eyes. "Mr. Whitman, this is a public commercial establishment. There is no reasonable expectation of privacy here." She paused, allowing the weight of her words to fully register. "And considering that your statements constitute clear and documented racial discrimination, we not only have the right, but the legal obligation, to preserve this evidence." Lana remained seated calmly, watching Charles with the detached curiosity of a scientist studying a chemical reaction. There was no trace of malice in her eyes, only the quiet satisfaction of someone who sees a meticulously executed plan reaching its planned climax. "Let's proceed to your own words," Marcus continued relentlessly, consulting the transcript. "The child wants to see the balance. She probably mistook this place for a regular agency." "Then your grandmother, is it? Maybe she's our cleaning lady. And my personal favorite. Who knows? Maybe she works in the kitchen of the hospital where my wife gets her plastic surgeries." Each quoted sentence caused Charles to shrink further in his chair, as if the words were physical blows. Madison, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke, her voice trembling. We didn't know who she was. It was a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding." Lana spoke for the first time in several minutes, her voice maintaining its unsettling calm. "Ms. Madison, you didn't know me, that's true, but you knew I was a 9-year-old child. That should have been enough to treat me with basic respect." Marcus turned a page in his documents. "Interesting that you mentioned not knowing who she was, because here I have evidence that you knew exactly what you were doing." He slid a photo across the table, a screenshot from Madison's Instagram account from 3 weeks earlier. In the image, Madison was posing at a charity event with a caption that read, "Loved learning about Jackson Holdings' social projects today. It's inspiring to see how a company can transform communities." The photo had been taken at Jackson Holdings' corporate headquarters, with the company logo clearly visible in the background. Charles stared at the photo, his eyes wide with horror. "Madison, you knew about Jackson Holdings." I didn't connect the dots," Madison stammered, but even she recognized how pathetic the excuse sounded. But there's more," Marcus continued implacably. He produced a second document, an email correspondence between Charles Whitman and Jackson Holdings from the last 6 months, negotiating consulting contracts that accounted for 40% of Whitman Enterprises' annual revenue. Victoria leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "Mr. Whitman, would you care to explain how you can claim to be unaware of a company that is responsible for nearly half of your annual income?" It was then that the full weight of the situation crashed down on Charles like a runaway train. He hadn't merely insulted a random child. He had systematically humiliated the heir to the very company that kept his own business afloat. Every contract, every payment he had received in recent months, had come indirectly from a family he had just attacked with recorded racist comments. "Lana," Victoria said, turning to the girl with genuine respect, "would you like to share the decision you've reached regarding the Whitman Enterprises contracts?" The girl nodded and spoke with the same unsettling calm she had maintained throughout the entire ordeal. "Mr. Charles, after carefully reviewing the terms of our existing contracts and consulting with my legal advisors, I have decided to exercise the termination clause for just cause that was included in all signed agreements." Charles felt the blood drain completely from his face. Just cause? What just cause? Marcus consulted another document. Racial discrimination documented by a company representative during business interactions. Clause 15. 3 specifies that discriminatory behavior constitutes a material breach of the agreement, resulting in immediate termination and forfeiture of all outstanding payments. This will destroy me financially," Charles whispered, his hands trembling as he mentally calculated the catastrophic implications. Without the Jackson Holdings contracts, his company would be unable to meet payroll or service its existing bank loans. "You should have thought about that before deciding that my skin color determined my worth," Lana replied simply. There was no cruelty in her voice, just the cold, unwavering application of logical consequences for consciously made choices. Madison burst into tears. "Please, she's just a child. Surely we can resolve this in a more civilized manner. Victoria smiled coldly. More civilized than the way you treated this just a child for the last 20 minutes? She gestured towards the transcript. Mrs. Madison, civility is a concept that should have been applied before, not after being. Confronted by the weight of her words, Lana, a figure of youthful defiance, gracefully pushed back her chair. Her petite frame stood in stark contrast to the commanding presence she exuded, a beacon of resolve in the face of blatant prejudice. Mr. Charles, Miss Madison, she began, her voice resonating with a maturity far beyond her 9 years. Today, you have unwittingly imparted upon me a lesson of profound significance. You have unveiled, in stark clarity, the existence of individuals who measure a person's worth not by the content of their character, but by the superficial hues of their skin and the perceived value of their attire. She turned, her gaze sweeping across the panoramic cityscape visible through the expansive window. The city lights twinkled below, a stark contrast to the somber atmosphere within the room. However, she continued, her voice gaining strength, you have also bestowed upon me a gift far more precious than any monetary compensation you could offer. You have provided irrefutable proof of my grandmother's wisdom, her unwavering belief that racism does not always manifest in overt acts of aggression or hateful slurs. Sometimes, she paused for emphasis. It disguises itself in the trappings of expensive suits and polite conversation, yet it remains in its essence undeniably racism. Charles, desperate to salvage the situation, made a final desperate plea. Lana, he stammered, his voice laced with a newfound humility. I can change. I can learn from this. Please give me a second chance to prove myself. The young girl slowly pivoted, her eyes locking onto Charles's with an unwavering intensity. Mr. Charles, she stated, her voice firm and resolute. You have had 9 long years to grasp the fundamental principle that children deserve respect, regardless of their background. You have had decades to internalize the simple truth that individuals should not be judged based on the color of their skin. I must ask, Mr. Charles, how many more second chances do you require to evolve into a decent human being? The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. The only sound that dared to intrude was the incessant ringing of Charles's phone, a relentless symphony of impending doom. It was undoubtedly the harbingers of professional ruin, the news of terminated contracts already rippling through the cutthroat world of business. He didn't even acknowledge the ringing, his gaze fixed on the young girl who held his fate in her hands. Marcus, ever the professional, snapped his briefcase shut with a definitive click, the sound echoing through the tense atmosphere. The events of today, along with all supporting documentation, will be permanently archived in our legal records, he announced, his voice devoid of emotion. Any attempt at retaliation, direct or indirect, will be met with swift and decisive legal action. As Lana prepared to exit the room, she paused at the threshold, turning back one last time. This was not a moment for gloating, nor was it an opportunity to inflict further cruelty. Instead, it was a moment to impart a final indelible lesson, one that would forever resonate in the memories of those who had so gravely underestimated her. You sought to define my place, she said, her voice filled with a wisdom that belied her tender age. Consider your mission accomplished. My place, she continued, a hint of a smile playing on her lips, is precisely where my grandmother always envisioned it to be, at the very top. From that vantage point, I will dedicate myself to building a better world for other children. Children who will one day walk into rooms like this and be judged not by the superficial characteristics of their appearance, but by the true content of their character. With a soft, almost imperceptible click, the door closed behind her, leaving Charles and Madison to grapple with the realization that they had not only orchestrated their own downfall but had also inadvertently witnessed the genesis of a powerful force for justice, a force they could never hope to comprehend or control. Unbeknownst to Charles and Madison, this public humiliation was merely the opening act in a carefully orchestrated symphony of consequences, a masterpiece of retribution meticulously planned by Lana and her late grandmother. It was a lesson about the true, far-reaching cost of prejudice, a lesson that would reverberate far beyond the sterile confines of those cold marble walls.